The 10 o'clock train from Dublin to Cork was derailed at Buttevant station at about 1 o'clock this afternoon. Estimates of the number of people killed and injured in the derailment varied throughout the day as rescue efforts continued at the scene of the crash.
It was a bank holiday weekend, and I got a phone call from my mother. This was before the days of mobile phones and that. And she was very agitated and very, very upset that she had heard on the news that there was some incident in Dublin. She knew he was driving the train. She rang me to know would I do something about it. Would I go to Buttevant and try and see what was happening? So I headed off with my father to Buttevant. I took no notice of it, like that's nothing, like, you know, but I said I'd go just to please her. I said I'd go to Buttevant. I didn't realise the enormity of it. You see, there was no internet, or there was no mobile phones, so we didn't really know. And when we got to Buttevant, that we saw Buttevant was actually sealed off by the police, had sealed off, but the Gardaí had sealed off Buttevant. So the local GA grounds, which was adjacent to the accident site, was used as the location for the emergency people. All the casualties were brought back there, apart from those that were brought away by those helicopters coming and going for the duration of the time that we were there. They were bringing people away to hospital, but anybody that was killed, like, was brought back to the GA grounds, used it more or less as a casualty site. So it wasn't a nice site when we got there, to tell you the truth. Like, it was fairly chaotic, you know. There was workers on the line, and they were shifting gravel from one side of the station to the other side of the station with a hand truck, one of these personnel propelled truck. And they'd go to the mound of gravel, they'd fill the gravel onto this hand truck, then they'd have to get up, walk the length of the platform up into the signal box, pull the signal, because they wanted to bring the truck from one rail line to the other rail line with the points. The points are the movable part of the line that you can swing the train from one line to the other line. But in order to do that, they had to change the signals so that an incoming train would know there was some problem. But after a while, they just got fed up of walking the whole length of the platform, up the steps, pull the thing, back down, move the hand truck over to the other line, go back up again, put the train back, put the signals back rather. So what they started to do then, they just put an iron bar into the rail and pulled it themselves on the railway line, which meant that did not trigger the signals to change. So that's what they were doing. And the day of the incident, they did that, pulled the bar, shifted the line, put a block in to keep it there, and forgot to take it out. So what happened was that the Dublin train, the express train, came through Mallow, or through Buttevant rather, at full tilt, was diverted onto a siding and into a full stop. Berkeley's engine ran into this big mound of gravel, which kind of softened the blow, kept the train upright. But he said, as he sat in the trail in the engine, the first carriage passed him, going head over heels, and on one side, and the second carriage passed him on the other side, doing loops. And that is where the people were killed and injured, was in those first two carriages, because there were only timber carriages in those days, so they just broke up. And there was one kind of poignant story that before they left Dublin, there was a couple came to him. Their son was very seriously ill in Mallow Hospital, and they were going to visit him. I think they were foreigners, there were a couple of foreigners, but he said that he couldn't stop the train in Mallow, he wasn't allowed, but he would slow it down sufficiently that they could step off. So he arranged for a friend of his, the guard on the train, to bring this couple up to the front carriage, the first carriage, and they were killed. That's where the damage was done.
On the day, it was the locals here who were here first on the scene. There was locals, there was a man who had cranes and that, and he came up with his equipment. I think his mother-in-law was a first aid worker, and she came to help. The injured were brought to the GA hall. The victims were put in a room here, But everybody just rallied, making tea, giving a house down here. I think it was the nearest phone at the time, so they were able to go down and phone relatives and say they were fine or they needed help. Or it was a helicopter. The helicopter actually was the most fortunate of all, because he was able to ferry people to Cork Hospital.
We had to try and deal with the injured who were still alive at first and see if we could rescue them and get them removed from the carriages, which was a bit of an ordeal because the carriages were on their side and turned over, so we had to try and get them out as best we could. But at that stage, what you really needed was heavy crane lifting. So it took some time because the cranes that were about the place weren't suitable, so we had to get William O'Brien's crane, which was based up in Kildare at the time. There was one boy, he was a Canadian boy, and it took a whole day to get the wheels of the train were over his chest. Even though he was still able to talk to us for a number of hours. There was nothing could be done because it needed a heavy lifting crane to get the wheels of the train off him.
Mary Coughlin trained as a nurse during the Blitz in London. Now retired, she had just come on duty as matron in Mallow Hospital when the first call came through.
On that particular day I was in at about 1 o'clock and I was changing, having a wash and maybe a mug of tea, and the phone rang from the switchboard to say that there was some sort of a train accident in Buttevant.
I cannot say enough for Air Arden helicopter. The boys in the helicopter had been transferring a patient to Cork University Hospital, and they were on their way home, and they saw all the activity in Buttevant, so they landed on the field just on the left-hand side of the track, and they were able to transfer a number of people to hospital that were injured. Also, the availability of our own hospital here in Mallow, it was unbelievable what Mallow Hospital did on the day. The amount of people that worked, and in those days you didn't have as many staff in the hospital, but what they did, they really done it to perfection. I could never ever say enough for them.
The ambulances would have had to negotiate 109 bad bends because the road crossed the railway several times, and by helicopter it was 10 minutes, smooth going. And once that happened, and all the nurses off duty, the ex-members of the staff, the people who were coming in on duty, they all came in, and I knew, it was going to be all right.
We received a call at 12:57 on August Bank Holiday Friday. Our presence was required. It was a very normal day up to that call, beautiful day. No idea what was at stake until we arrived on the scene. It still sticks, on people's minds that were at the scene of that accident, really. You always think about it, almost on a daily basis.
There are people still alive here in the parish who are deeply, deeply traumatised. It's indelibly marked in their memory, and it's a traumatic memory for a lot of people.
It was quite traumatic, actually, yeah. It was horrific, to be honest with you. It was the worst we had in my time as a member of the service. something out of a film. You wouldn't see it. It was pure carnage. There was carriages everywhere, and even some of the wheels off the train were after coming detached, and everything was all over the place.
Excellent.
Derek Fox works with PC Pro, a computer supplies company in Cork. But 25 years ago, he was one of 4 Irish Rail staff working in the dining car that day. By lunchtime, his buddy, 17-year-old Mark Barron, working on the train for the summer holidays, would be dead. Derek would escape with cuts and bruises, as would Jimmy Leddy.
I was only at coming into the dining car. And myself and Derek was in the bar, and I was at the kitchen part. We had a bang like from underneath the train, and jerked, and I went again. I seen it tilting over.
I thought we were after derailing, nothing big, because I felt it shake, and the next thing we just seemed to rise into the air, and there was banging, crashing, there was fierce noise. People have said to me, how did you get out? Did you get out to a door or to a window? And I said, no, there was nothing left. There was actually nothing left. It totally broke up on impact.
Just carnage, there was carnage. There was if there was carriages, it was as if a bomb had gone off. There was carriages everywhere. There was helicopters coming and going. There was CE men escorting ambulances in, and there was people bringing stretchers from the scene. Obviously, dead bodies. We didn't realise it at the time. Into the GA complex. There was a new GA complex just opened there, and but all we wanted to know was where was Bertie. We thought Bertie was dead, and it was a CA man that met us that told us that Bertie was fine, Bertie was okay, and we were looking for him then, and we found him. He was in the complex, in the GA complex. He was lucky because he ran into this mound of gravel. If the mound of gravel wasn't there, like God knows what would happen. So the gravel both softened the impact and kept the engine upright, whereas the what behind him just tumbled past them, So he was lucky to escape it, but to be able to get down from the carriage, get his bag of detonators, and run up the line and down the line, and pass all this carnage, it shows fierce presence of mind. A CIE man is trained that once there's an incident on the line, his first priority is to protect the road. In other words, to prevent some other train from coming on the scene. And despite all the carnage around him, he said that the first carriage passed him going head over heels, and the second carriage passed him on the other side likewise. But he grabbed his bag of detonators and he ran to one side of the incident and put detonators in the line, and then he ran past you can imagine the carnage that he passed now at that incident, and he passed it all and went on the other side and put the detonators, and when he did the last detonator on the line, he heard the train coming from net nitrate, the chemical train as they called it, and if that had come into the incident, it would have taken the town of Buttevant away with it. So that was his. He acted as he should have acted, and people were in awe of that after us at the incident, that he had the wherewithal to think of doing that, So he was a bit of a hero in the end, We sat at home that night in his house with him, and I remember my father brought down a bottle of whiskey. He thought he would need to be steadied up, but he wasn't. He was totally. No, I'm sure he was. But we sat that night and we waited for the news to come on, and the 9 o'clock news came on, and there was all kind of questions. What happened? What happened? How did it happen? But everybody in CIE knew what happened. There was no secret of what happened. But we were desperately annoyed that night when I can't remember who the minister for transport or for CAE was, but he said that we're not sure what happened. He said it could have been it could have been, the train could have been faulty. He said it could have been the driver went too fast, maybe, he said, you know. And we were outraged at that because everybody in Syria knew exactly what happened. It was just an incident that shouldn't have happened. So when we heard him saying that maybe the driver was at fault, we got on to a friend of mine at the Cork Examiner. We met him the following morning and we gave him the full facts. We told him exactly what happened. So you could say the Examiner broke the story then, that they got the inside story of what happened. And we wanted to dispel any notion that my uncle had been anyway at fault. Like, he was totally blameless. In fact, he was the hero of the hour in many respects, you know. And we thought it was a very mean effort on the behalf of the minister to try and shed some of the blame to him, you know. Well, like all major incidents, the cause of the accident was human error locally, or shall we say carelessness locally, but the system in vogue at the time lent itself to that carelessness. And at the inquiry, there was the people higher up the ladder were ducking and diving, and they were responsible for having that system in place. Okay, the local fellas availed of the system to make life easier for themselves and cause the accident, but that system should not have been in vogue. Like, there shouldn't have not been a capability to change the points without the signals changing as well. You know, that was a dreadful flaw in the system, and it was the local fellas that abused that were kind of hung out to dry, whereas the people further up the line who allowed that system to be in vogue, they seemed to get away scot-free. I was at the inquiry, and that's what struck me very much about the inquiry, that it was the local guys were just thrown under the bus, really, you know, and the people who were responsible for that system seemed to get off scot-free. That was my memory of it anyway.
18 people died in the crash last August, and it was badly set points which sent the Dublin Express careering into a siding at Buttevant station. Having given that as the reason for the crash, the investigation team is harsh on CIE management, which it accuses of bad communication with staff, casual supervision and organisational weakness.
I mean, counselling didn't exist in those days, and I suppose a huge void where CIE were concerned. They had nothing to do with us. They had nothing to do with any of the families. It was all very cold, very business-like. I suppose one thought I've had over the years is, why didn't I take it upon myself to contact other families who were affected? But I was just out of it. I just couldn't even think to do that. And it must have been the case with the other families too, because none of them communicated. Everybody lived in kind of shocked isolation, you know? Like, the support from family and friends was mega. But I did a bit of counselling, but it was 10 years later, and it was the best money I ever spent. I just feel if it had been available to those who had lost loved ones at the time, it would have made a big difference to all our lives, you know. But I'm just so privileged, like, to have the family and friends that I do have.
It was quite traumatic, yeah, but as time, we didn't have any what backup that time as regards counselling or anything at all of that nature. So it would be something that you wouldn't get off your mind ever. You'd always have to think about it, and August bank holiday weekend never goes by without I thinking. I have gone down there, I have visited the scene there a few times, and the anniversary of that accident.
I was buried on there bits of the carriage. I threw the bits of the carriage that were on me off, and next thing I looked up and I was standing in front of the engine, which meant I travelled about, I suppose, maybe 300 feet through the air, something like that. The whole carriage had. I looked around, everything was quiet. It was so quiet, there wasn't a sound for a couple of seconds. And the next thing, people started screaming and shouting. I remember I saw somebody, they were badly trapped, but there was nothing we could do. There was so much stuff on them. You couldn't move it, you know. We went looking for Mark, as I said. We couldn't find him, you know.
As I came onto the platform, the people started to point towards further up. So I took off running, and as I was getting closer and closer, I began to see the magnitude of what had occurred. When I saw what I was facing into, I immediately got together a group of locals who had come from their cars in and were there before me. I got a couple of groups of them, and I got them working to shift some of the debris.
Right, out now, everyone! Everyone out now, come on, out!
Scenes that stay with me. I can remember 4 people literally tearing a seat apart with their hands to get somebody out from under it. Diesel, burnt oil, stone and dried blood. I often woke up afterwards sweating fairly heavily, wake up in the bed, and this smell would stay with me. It took a lot of years before that died down.
People who had seen us put pieces in the paper to say there was a memorial coming up. There was a woman, and her son was Mark Barron. He was 17 years old. And she wrote to me and said, my son was the youngest on the train, and I've letters and cards and contacts from loads of the victims' families to say thank you for the memorial.
The family will occasionally go back there. Anytime I can't say no every time we go through Buttevant we don't, but we do occasionally go back. It's nice to see the seat with his name, where he's remembered at the scene and that, you know. But like, he survived there, but there was 18 other people that didn't, and a lot of people since then have, or I can imagine a lot of people that had life-changing injuries as well, that didn't come well out of that scene, you know.
It had never been about apportioning blame or saying why it happened or who was to blame. It was about recognising that it happened and apologising. And I think actually I have a letter from one saying that they just felt so good when the chairman of CIE, it was at the time, stood up and apologised here for it happening. And that's all they needed. I think it was just people contacting me and saying, I was on that train, or I missed the train. You know, that a girl rang me after seeing it on Reeling in the Years. Do you know the way they look back over different things? And she said, that guitar, that was my guitar. And another family from England, Samuel Cork, had died in the crash. And they were all, he worked on British Rail. And they said they'd take one last trip on the train before they would go back home. He died, his wife was injured, his daughter was injured, his son-in-law was injured, and his grandchildren were all injured. But his daughter never got to go to her father's funeral in England, but she came back here 25 years later, and she said it was closure for her because she had been too badly injured during the crash, and she was able to rest. Our selection on the committee was not just made up of locals, it was relatives of the victims, it was people who came across it on the day, people who were involved on the day, and they were all able to give their own input. So we covered a broad spectrum, especially having the Moira Woodworth, who was one of the victims' wives, and she always gave us her perspective as to what she felt was right as well.
A friend of my mother's, her cousin lived in Buttevant, And she had said to my mother's friend, I'm sure Moira is going to be contacted. They're talking about setting up a committee to celebrate the 25th anniversary. So it was Terry rang me first day. I was a little bit dubious and a little bit skeptical about how I would cope, because I was the only person on that committee who had lost somebody. Everybody else was, there were representatives of CIE or Buttevant natives, or, you know. Now, a lot of people would have passed in that 25 years, but it was lovely. It was the first, how would I say, general grieving, you know. Number one, the recognition of the awfulness of what happened.
You know, it was a very poignant day, you know, I must say, because it was the first chance that these people had to come back and kind of talk to people involved in a more calm situation, you know. But Bertie chatted to them all and met them all and spoke with them, and they were very appreciative of what he had done on the day and that, you know. So it was a memorable day, I must say, you know, and it was a beautiful sunny morning, I remember, yeah.
June the 9th and 3 members of the Buttevant Rail Disaster Memorial Committee have travelled to Irish Rail's Inchicore Works in Dublin to meet with pattern maker and designer Conor Murphy. The committee, which is made up of local people, members of the emergency services, Irish Rail and Cork County Council, came together to mark the 25th anniversary.
Having him working on it is brilliant, because he has the whole background and the whole feel of the railway and everything involved in it. The memorial itself is train tracks and how the train came off the siding. So it was very emotional. I think we all felt a little bit teary-eyed. But it'll bring it back to a lot of people, and it will be a very, very sad day for a lot of people. But after 25 years, they need something.
I think it will be done with great dignity, and I think it will be appreciated by the relatives of those who died, those who were injured, their families, and indeed by the entire community. I think that deserves great credit for it.
I think after 25 years, I mean, I don't travel by train much now, but anytime I have travelled by train and I've passed it, I think of those 18 people. I think of people I knew that day who died. And I think it's nice to have memorials, just to leave people think how lucky they are. I mean, people are travelling there every day. It's a bit like seeing the crosses on the side of the road. It makes people think, and that's a good thing.
In fairness to Terry has been very good in keeping the memory of Buttevant and what happened that day in Buttevant, keeping it alive, you know. But I said that for the general population of people, they just forget about it, you know. Only those that were intimately involved would remember it. There was a lovely occasion there when they opened the commemoration, and Bertie was there for it, you know. And while we were there, the train, the equivalent train from Dublin came and stopped for a moment there and moved on again. You know, it was very poignant at the time, I remember. But Bertie was there. Bertie managed it fine. You know, he was okay about it. Like, Bertie was totally blameless, totally blameless. So he didn't have any hang-ups about it afterwards. As I say, CIE had him drive the next train 2 days later, maybe 3 days later, from Cork to Dublin, and Bertie drove it up. I mean, there was no what's the phrase they used? This post-traumatic stress syndrome. That wasn't invented back in the 1980s, no.
It wasn't just about people who were injured, it was about people who were traumatised as well. We had asked that on the anniversary that if a train was going through, would it be able to stop? And we were told no, that they can't do that, it's not company policy. But as we started, we were just about to start the mass, and a train was coming through, and he stopped. And there's a picture of Moira Woodworth standing at the rails, and the train passing, and he just stopped for not even a minute, I'd say. But there was a hush came over the whole place, and it just put everybody into the right frame of mind for the Mass to start, and it was really, really special.
Absolutely. No, it meant an awful lot to me. An awful lot to me. It was very emotional, and yeah, I had more feeling that time, like I was absolutely heartbroken on the 25th, whereas I never allowed any heartbreak, I think, up to then, you know. So it was a wonderful thing to organise, wonderful thing for all involved.
It's quite clear that everybody around here reacted magnificently to the tragedy. All the various CIE personnel, and particularly the local community here in Buttevant, the women in particular, were really magnificent in their response to the need of the moment. And I think that the Cork Regional Hospital in particular did a magnificent job looking after it. It is a tragic, desperate sight to have to see something like this.
I couldn't say enough about Buttevant community. I think they're wonderful people who have had an anniversary mass in the church every year since the accident, and they have candles with the names on them lighting every year, and that's very beautiful.
So we have a lovely memorial here in the parish church here in St. Mary's, which has a lantern lit every day to commemorate the 18 people who died. And we're grateful to the people who open up the church that they remember to light it each morning and to keep it going. And it has never failed to be lit. I think the lantern is a sign of hope, it's a sign of consolation, a sign of remembrance, and a sign of real care by the parishioners for all the families. I think as well the fact that it's synonymous, as I say, that the accident is kind of written into people's memories here, especially for the more older generation, but they have conveyed the memory through storytelling, through the incidents of it locally, and the significance of the beautiful bronze plaque that was erected for the 25th anniversary, that the younger generations now will be also conscious of the memorial of all of those lives. So that I think it's something that is going to be really, really important for the younger generation for the years ahead as well. So I think that lantern here in the Church of St. Mary's will be lit for many, many years to come. I hope and pray.
So far, 10 bodies have been brought to Cork Regional Hospital this evening. A short time ago, a hospital spokesman said that they were still in the process of identifying the dead and then contacting the next of kin. Gardaí are working round the clock.
It's a day I'll never forget. My husband went off the night before in his car to Wexford on business, but when he was at the depot, he met another colleague from work who was going in the same direction, so he decided to leave his car and go with him. And the next morning, which was Friday the 1st of August, he was dropped off at Limerick Junction. There was one train shooting straight through. The second one was going on to Tralee, and he got on the third train, and that was the train that crashed in Buttevant. I had no idea he was on the train because I took it he was driving home, and he rang me that morning and said we were going to dinner in Roberts Cove with friends that evening, and he said I'll be back in Cork by about 2 o'clock. This company, which was Irish Industrial Gases, that is BOC today, rang me and said we have reason to believe that Bruce was on the train. So I wasn't too panicked at that stage. I was Everybody in Cork was very panicked in their own way because the ambulances were flying through and the sirens all day. And the Cork Examiner was just across the road from me. And I kept going over and coming back and couldn't get any information out of them whatsoever. Then I had a phone call from my sister who worked in the laboratory in CUH, and she said to me, I think you should go home. Now, home at that stage was to my parents' house. They had a business in Cork. So I still was on mega denial about anything. There was nothing definitive anywhere. And yeah, when I got to my parents' house then, I had a call from CUH from, I think she was actually a nun, to say, Mrs. Woodworth, we'd be very, very grateful to you if you would come up and help us to identify. So I sailed up and said, God, I'd love to do anything I can to help. In the meantime, I had got onto a cousin of mine who lived in quite near Buttevant, and he went out onto the tracks looking for Bruce. I think it affected him greatly for years after, and he was a young man. I got in the door anyhow of the, well, it was called the regional hospital at that stage, and a priest just stepped out and said, follow me, and just walked me into a room, and Bruce was there, dead. Looking as handsome, or more so, than he ever did in his life, with a couple of gashes. But that's how I got the news. At the hospital, they were suggesting very strongly that I would take some Valium or a Valium injection or something in the sedation line. And I just kept saying, no, 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 I've got to deal with this, I've got to deal with this. And if you spoke to any member of my family from there on, I was just stoic, but I actually think I was numb, quite numb, you know. One of the big reasons why, in retrospect, I feel I had to do that was we had one daughter, her name is Karen, and Karen was diagnosed with autism in the May of that year, and 3 months later, Bruce was killed, you know. So it was a lot for one person to take on board, but thank God I got through it. We'd say a prayer for Dad every night. We'd have his photograph up every night, and she still talks about him. And you'd say to her, and where is he? He's in heaven. So that was the best I could do with the disability that she had. But it was right for her now. Didn't know if it was right at the time, but it was right for her, you know. We had a mass in the house, and yeah, she hadn't uttered a word until that night, and she was 3 years and 3 months. And she came flying in and she said, Daddy's all gone. I'm sure everything was different. Everything was different. I found family occasions very, very difficult. You know, weddings, anniversaries. They used to tear me apart. I never pretended anything, but they used to tear me apart. Very emotional. I think since the day he died, I've become totally professional at hiding my emotions, you know? Which is not a very healthy thing, to push them way, way, way down. But it was my only way I knew how to get through. I've had moments in my life, very, very, very difficult moments, but and it's been a struggle at times, but I'm still here today anyhow. I still miss him like hell, and I'll always love him, you know.
The grim task of recovering bodies went on until late last night. Many of them were badly mutilated, and it was a harrowing task for the rescue services. Heavy lifting gear was used to pull apart the carriages which had jackknifed. This morning the task was resumed at first light and went on throughout the day.
There was a bit of a rumble or a wobble, and there was the carriage that seemed to disintegrate. It was all over in a few seconds. There was very little warning at all. And the carriage that I was in was largely wiped out.
The dining car, of course, was one of the worst hit areas. When you came through, what were the scenes like around you?
The carriages, you know, the dining car was all smashed. There was one up along the side of a hill, like
the whole train seemed to slide.
One or two people like outside. And we just got up, like looking around to see if we could find anyone. Couldn't really do much.